What's good, YouTubers and YouTubettes? This is JBsports back again with another one. Is pay-per-view dead in the U.S.? Now, a couple of years ago, Eddie Hearn, the Puff Daddy of boxing promoters, always in the video, came over here with that $1 billion DAZN deal. It was a bogus $1 billion DAZN deal. That deal actually wasn't worth no $1 billion. It had the potential if everything went well. You know what I'm saying? The ceiling was $1 billion, but the floor was much lower. It ended up being not only on the floor, but it was damn near up under the floor. It was goddamn in the goddamn, it was in the goddamn, what they call that? You got a room up under your house. You know what I'm saying? It was in the goddamn basement. The numbers turned out to be when it was all said and done. That's why Eddie Hearn is in the minor leagues when it comes to putting on shows on DAZN here in the U.S. Man, he's basically, he basically ain't doing too much here in the U.S. He's putting on outside of Canelo Alvarez, which he's gonna be promoting here May 7th. That fight's gonna take place in Las Vegas on the Strip. Outside of Canelo Alvarez, he ain't doing a damn thing here in America as far as putting on big events. It's supposed to be the big takeover. He's supposed to bring all these U.S. promoters to their knees, and nothing further from the truth, because he didn't come nowhere close to that actually happening. That's neither here nor there. Let's talk about Spence-Ugas, who was the WBA welterweight champion, who was a clear B-side, taking on Errol Spence Jr., the WBC and IBF welterweight champion, the clear A-side, where, if I'm not mistaken, was putting on his, let me get back. He had the Mikey Garcia fight. He had the Sean Porter fight. And he had the Danny Garcia fight. So this was his 4th consecutive pay-per-view fight, with him being the headliner. Now, Dan Rafael, who's a well-known boxing writer, who's been covering boxing for well over 20 years, tweeted out here earlier today that Errol Spence Jr. versus Spence-Ugas did 240,000 pay-per-view buys. Now, before that, it was speculated that Errol Spence Jr. versus Spence-Ugas did 500,000 pay-per-view buys. When that number came out, I was like, nah, I don't think it did no 500,000 pay-per-view buys. That's why I didn't do no video about it, because I didn't believe those numbers. Those numbers was on the internet. You know, you got these boxing fans just throw numbers out and people take it as gospel and they do videos about it, but you just got to be a little bit more responsible, in my opinion. You know, you got to go with the numbers by well-known boxing writers who have contacts with these promoters. That's what you got to go with, in my opinion. With all that being said, Rick Glazier, who's another well-known boxing writer who's been covering boxing for a long time, for at least a decade or more, tweeted out that, no. The fight didn't do 240,000 pay-per-view buys. Miss me with that. Better yet, the fight didn't come nowhere close to 240,000 pay-per-view buys. Showtime that put on the pay-per-view is taking a bath on that fight. They've been taking a bath on previous pay-per-views. And the only reason why they putting these numbers out is to try to make themselves look good. He basically said that Stephen Espinoza, for a minute now, ain't been putting out his pay-per-view numbers because he's been taking a bath on these pay-per-view fights, according to Rick Glazier. That's what he said. And I'm here to tell you right here and now that I believe Dan Rafael before I believe Rick Glazier, who is a well-known PBC hater and top-ranked cheerleader. So miss me with what he got to say. And the thing about it is he came out and said, I got the real numbers. Okay, Rick, release them. If you got the real numbers, release them. Because Dan Raphael released his, all you did was contradict what he said, but you didn't want to release no numbers. Miss me with that, Rick. You's a hater. Now, Dan went on to say that the fight did 240,000 pay-per-view buys. That includes linear TV, satellite, and streaming. That's what people don't understand. That's the same thing we was talking about with the Gervonta Tank Davis, Eastside Cruz, when those numbers came out. And Stevie Espinoza and Leonard LB said, hold on, the numbers are still coming in. I think people don't understand. This is not pay-per-view boxing in the 80s. This is not pay-per-view boxing in the 90s. This ain't even pay-per-view boxing in the 2000s. Because with this streaming, people can stream now. They're not going to just go home and get their remote control and order the fight. It don't work like that, like it did back in the day. People are going to stream it. You know what I'm saying? People are going to watch it on satellite. And people are going to go to sports bars. I think people underestimate how much these sports bars are paying for these fights. I ain't going to lie, though. Back in the day, I used to always have a fight party. Anytime they had a big fight, I have a fight party. I invite family and friends and, you know, and have a fight party. Barbecue or cook something up and have everybody come over there and watch the fight at my pad. But here recently, probably the last 10 to 15 pay-per-view events, I go to a sports bar and watch it. I just like to be around people, watch the fight. And I kind of like to, see for myself what kind of buzz the fight brings. You know, you're not able all the time to go to the fight live, so go to a sports bar and see if people are coming in to watch the fight, or maybe they're coming in to watch other sporting events. When you're in a sports bar, they're going to have other sporting events going on along with the fights. And I'm here to tell you now, when I went to Deontay Wilder versus Luis Ortiz, the second fight, there was a buzz in Brewing's sports bar. When I went to watch Gervonta Tank Davis versus Eastside Cruz here recently, it was a buzz. When I went to Ochos Locos sports bar, that's a Latino sport bar. I ain't gonna lie, I'm gonna tell you right now, Gervonta Tank Davis has a huge fan base in the Latino community. Floyd Mayweather Jr. is doing a good job with him, just like he did in his career, crossing over and bringing the Latino fan base to buy and watch his events. I'm here to tell you right here and now, and I'm gonna tell you something. Errol Spence Jr., in my opinion, is a top 3 pay-per-view draw. Right behind Canelo Alvarez, Deontay Wilder, then you put Errol Spence Jr., and then you put Gervonta Tank Davis. I ain't gonna lie to you, I think Gervonta Tank Davis is a little bit more versatility to his fan base. Maybe Errol Spence Jr. does better numbers, but Gervonta Tank Davis has been able to, like I say, bring in the Latino community, bring in the African-American community, and bring on the Anglo-Saxon community, which is always important when you're talking about buying pay-per-view fights. So we will see what happens, and we will see what transpires, but don't believe Rich Glazier. He's a PBC hater, a top-ranked boxing cheerleader. He's a guy that's always speaking negatively on the PBC and its fighters. So don't believe nothing he got to say. Believe in Dan Raphael, who's neutral. He supports PBC. He supports top-ranked boxing. He supports matchroom boxing. He done several videos pumping up Tyson Fury versus Dillian White. I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna do another video on that fight too. I got a little bit extra for that fight. You know, I did a breakdown of that fight, but I got a little bit of final thoughts, last tidbits for Tyson Fury versus Dillian White. Some keys to victories for both fighters. I'll be breaking that fight down, and I'll be releasing that video tomorrow in the lead up to that heavyweight title fight. But as far as Errol Spence Jr. goes, he is a draw, but we in different days. We in different times. Long gone are the $1 million pay-per-view buys. Long gone are those when Floyd Mayweather Jr. was at the top of his game and producing those type of numbers. Long gone are those. I think the last fight that did $1 million buys was Floyd Mayweather Jr. versus Logan Paul, and that was an exhibition fight. So if you're doing anything over 200,000 pay-per-view buys, and you put that on top of the fact that he did 39,946 in attendance for his fight, that produced a $5 million gate. The pay-per-view buys produced an $18 million gate. So that's $23 million in revenue. And we ain't even talking about the sponsorship. We ain't even talking about other revenue streams. You know, when we're talking about worldwide. This fight was shown not only in the United States, but it was shown worldwide. This fight made money. And this fight verified the fact that Errol Spence Jr. is a pay-per-view draw, and it is a boxing attraction, and will command the lion's share of the revenue. I ain't talking about the pay-per-view split. The split between him and Crawford should be 50-50, but he should make more than Crawford when we talk about guarantee. So we will see what happens, and we will see what transpires. But Errol Spence Jr. versus Spence-Ugas did 240,000 pay-per-view buys, and his next fight will be on pay-per-view, because if he's doing these dismal numbers like Rick Glazer says he is doing, he will no longer be on pay-per-view. But Rick Glazer say, well, they got to put him on pay-per-view because they got to justify the money that they've been given by these big bankrollers. But Rick Glazer is contradicting himself, and Rick Glazer ain't nothing but a hater, because people that got a lot of money ain't in the business of losing money. So evidently, Errol Spence is making money. Evidently, Gervonta Davis is making money on their pay-per-view buys. So miss me with that, you hater, Rick Glazer. Follow me on Twitter, JBsports3303. Like, share, and subscribe to JB Sports, the man, the myth, the legend. And I holla.